Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. This is the third virtual chat to introduce a basic lens of faith values and ethics that would offer a theological grounding for the Theologies of Care initiative. I am Dora Muhammad, and I invite you to immerse yourself in deep listening to our conversation today, where we will explore spiritual principles and practices that ground compassionate, authentic reproductive healthcare equity, the CARE, in Theologies of Care. I'm the consultant at Faith and Public Life for Theologies of Care. It's a new initiative that I developed and we launched in last December during Wake Forest's Divinity School's annual Hatch Symposium. The aim of the initiative is to inspire more higher educational institutions to commit to including comprehensive reproductive health narratives in their student life, campus programming, and credited coursework as a pathway to equip the formation of faith leaders who can offer non-judgmental spiritual care and accompaniment for reproductive health care decisions. Several years ago, just for a little background, FPL conducted a survey of people of faith and found that when reproductive health discussions expanded beyond a single focused emphasis on abortion as an issue, most people of faith supported a comprehensive scope of reproductive health equity. So today's conversation is curated to center access to contraception as one of those important issues to include. Access to contraception became an explicit legal target immediately after the Supreme Court's reversal of Roe v. Wade, which only further reinforced religious puritanical barriers to access. So our conversation will focus on faith values from a Christian lens that offer theological grounding to support people of faith facing barriers to access contraception in religious cultures where premarital sex is judged as unclean and impure. With the backdrop of Valentine's Day love and all of the associated pressures of sexual liaisons, this week presents us, I thought, with a relevant context to ask the question and explore. How can people of faith cut through religious rhetoric of blame and shame to offer authentic consultation for issues related to sexual intimacy? So my conversation partners today come from Vanderbilt University's Divinity School, where Dr. Eleanor Moore is the director of the Carpenter Program in Religion, Gender, and Sexuality, and Aaliyah Ponder is completing her Master of Divinity program. Their scholarship and personal insight will offer us a unique scope of the importance of including safe sex education in comprehensive reproductive health narratives. So let's dive in. I'll start with Aaliyah, who honestly, we would not be here today without her enthusiasm in wanting to see theologies of care brought to Vanderbilt. Her passion and her commitment to this issue was extremely clear within my first conversation with her. But then when she shared her research focus, it was absolutely confirmed. So to lay a foundation for our conversation, Aaliyah, can you please just tell us more about your research project, starting with your thesis title, which says it all?
Thank you, Dora. Yes, so my senior seminar project thesis topic was purifying me, sexing the body, mind, and soul. And what I'm looking at is how Black women and girls are receiving less culturally relevant, comprehensive sexual education than their counterparts within and outside of the church. Abstinence to marriage sexual education is, coming to the forefront of a lot of these conversations that are related to sex and sexuality. And what it's doing is it's leading to a larger public health issue. If people think that their bodies are sinful, that their desire is sinful, they're less likely to go get tested. They're less likely to inquire about condoms and Plan Bs and other modes of contraception. What I was also seeing is that, the Black church is made up of 70 to 90% Black women, right? But the
Mhm.
way this, which we'll talk about later on, everybody won't be married. And
Mhm.
so are we, providing sexual education that is not considerate of the cultural and social barriers that Black women and girls are facing. We also see there being several accounts of, well, more than several accounts, but several that we know of pastors requiring their young female members to come to the front of the church and apologize for being sexually active, becoming pregnant, and their sexual partner is not present, right? And so this is leading to further shame and self degradation that is also contributing to the public health issue.
That there is a story in the Bible about that, right? The woman who was stoned is like, well, where is her partner? Like, so there's a historic arc to that, which I hope we can touch on. Want to toss it to Dr. Ellen right now, just to sort of lay the foundation for her work with the Carpenter Program, which in itself has a long history in its establishment at Vanderbilt, but also has now expanded to other universities. It was founded in 1996, and you became the director in 2007. Can you share with us sort of this historic foundation of the program, your approach to leading it in our contemporary context, and why such a program is valuable, even perhaps vital at institutions
Mhm.
of higher theological education?
Happy to. Thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this, Dora. So yes, as you said, the Carpenter Program was founded in 1996, which makes it the oldest program of its kind in the country. The original vision for it was laid by an alum of the Divinity School, the Reverend Ann B. Day, who was a UCC minister and very active in the Reconciling Ministries program for that denomination. And originally, that's what she'd envisioned the program would focus on. But sorry, I'm dealing with a little
Okay, drink as much tea as you need
upper
to.
respiratory, upper respiratory thing. Uh, and Vanderbilt, though, was not happy about that. So they wanted to, that's how the Carpenter Program ended up with its name, the Carpenter Program in Religion, Gender, and Sexuality, which I view as quite fortuitous because it means anywhere religion, gender, and sexuality show up, we can show up. And that's pretty much everywhere, it's a lot of places. So, including today's conversation. A couple of the ways that the Carpenter Program, this Carpenter Program specifically, has done it around issues of access to reproductive care and that kind of thing. My first assistant director was the Reverend Lindsay Godwin, who came to us from Planned Parenthood. And she had actually, in fact, she's one of several alums from the Divinity School who have ended up working there at one point or another. And among the things that she's done is actually write a curriculum for sex education called that's useful for churches and congregations. And one thing that she does for us, and it's gotten a lot of traction with particularly with more progressive denominations, because it's and she I think I can't remember if this is the actual name of the curriculum itself, but she teaches a course for us every couple of years where she teaches the curriculum to our students. And the course is called Sacred and Sexual. I
Love it.
think just that title, I think, gives you a comprehensive sense of how the
Yes,
Carpenter Program looks at the relationship between religion, sexuality, and gender.
I love that. Absolutely
Yeah,
love that.
yeah.
Do you think that it's more challenging within a theological institution like a divinity
Mhm.
school to have this conversation, or actually it's best curated within the walls of sort of theological study
Mhm. Well,
that sex is
probably,
sacred?
yeah, it probably depends on what theological school you're talking about. For example, I grew up Southern Baptist, and just a few miles up the road is Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. I'm
Mm-hmm.
sure that would be a very different conversation
Yes.
at Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, which I actually attended for a little while, way back in the day, before I came to Vanderbilt. And before it became, I was there for the conservative takeover, which was not a
Mm.
pleasant thing to witness.
So,
But at a school like this, I think it's really vital, because I mean, you're hearing it from Aaliyah already. so many of our students come in with trying to recover from the various kinds of trauma that they've experienced at the hands of churches and congregations whose perspectives on these questions are damaging, particularly to women and to gender nonconforming people, to queer people of all sorts. So I think it really does matter a lot that this conversation happens in a theological setting, because religion is really, I think, at the root of the problem. I don't think it's incidental. I think it's really at the root of the problem. And I can say a
Yes.
little more about that at some point. So, yeah.
This is good. Yes. My next question will give you some space to lean into that, both you and Aaliyah. So, because Aaliyah had mentioned it, but it really ties into what you just said, and it's about the fact that not everybody gonna get married. I'm single as it is now, right? So,
Right,
I want to talk about sort of abstinence and the premarital sex taboos,
right.
based on a report that Aaliyah had shared in November 22, talking about the racial gap in U.S. marriage rates in the Journal of Blacks in Higher Education. So it said that 34.4% of Black men were married in 2021, compared to 28.6% of Black women. For whites, 55.5% of men and 52.4% of women were married. More than 48% of all Black women and 51.1% of Black men had never been married. So placing that statistic also within a context that I learned, which to me was fascinating because it wasn't like a health clinic, but I was told, you told me that right now on the desk of the Carpenter Program's assistant director, there's a bowl of condoms that's open for students to take as they need, right? In case any other institutions listening want to follow this practice, I want to delve into that, right? Like, so what grounds, when you talk about sort of even when you talk about the root of a lot of this is religion, right? This anti-sex environment. So really, even though my question initially was like sort of what grounds the provision of safe sex education and resources, right, on the universal level, actually on a reversal of that is like what is needed to uproot really the negative, the anti-sex kind of theology that exists, that theology, and what kind of supports are needed to create such an intentional student culture, because there also was a time, based on religious, quote unquote, family values, that birth control could only be accessed by women with the permission of their husbands. So if there's a majority of women who are not even getting married, that's problematic right there. So give me your thoughts on those. I'll start with you, Dr. Moore, and then Aaliyah, you can chime in.
Okay. Well, I'm not sure exactly. Well, I know when that practice started. Actually, I don't know when that practice started, but I think it's been ongoing for a while. And part of it is, I think, a function of being embedded in a university, because the larger university has long had programs for, well, since the founding of the Women's Center back in, I think it was in the 80s.
Wow.
I don't know how long they've had an office that's actually devoted to sexual care and to access to contraception and support for pursuit of abortion if needed, whatever. But that's been in place for a good number of years now. And we also have a program called Project Safe that provides confidential support to students who are victims of sexual assault of some sort or another. And that is separate from the pursuit of any kind of legal action that the university might be obligated to take based on accusations of sexual assault and so on. So I think there's a pretty deep ethos now here at the university for offering this kind of care for women on our campus. And certainly what the Divinity School is doing is of a piece with that.
Very good. Your thoughts, Aaliyah?
Well, we have a women's center on campus, right? So like you can access condoms at the Divinity School, but if you go across campus to the women's center, you're able to access lubricant, condoms, pads, tampons, Plan Bs, or emergency contraception, and dental dams. Like I mean, the culture is definitely sex positive, but it's also, teaching safe sex by ensuring that these type of resources are accessible, right? Like not just talking about it, but showing in
Mhm.
action that, the institution is in support of it. And to what Dr. Armour was saying, I think that a lot of that has to do with, in terms of the divinity school, the religious pluralism that's encouraged and
Mm,
taught, and like we're having discussions where we're thinking about, okay, what does this text mean to this particular community? What does this text mean to this particular religious group? And being able to like sit in the crosshairs of the tension. I mean, I got to
yes,
take a Dr. Herbert Marbury in the fall that was Song of Songs. And we were
yes.
literally what is happening with
Hmm.
um, sexuality and sex in the text, and how are we reading our own biases into these things. And so I think
Mm,
that, part it's resources, but it's also a lot of being willing to have the conversation and having faculty that are willing to stand alongside you as you engage in this theological inquiry. I don't think that we as students would be able to
yes.
successfully, quest without the support of our faculty.
I love that. And I thank you for referencing literally a very specific class and coursework, because I think that tension intimidates people. People are scared of leaning into that tension. And so to have not just the center within, sort of like the Women's Center, again, where we're used to perhaps having these conversations in a healthcare setting. We're not used to having these conversations in a religious setting. And I think that's the
Mhm.
barrier we need to break through.
Mhm.
And not everyone is willing to break through that tension to do it.
Mhm.
So having faculty, Dr. Moore, is there any, and thank you again for highlighting Dr. Moore, the faculty who actually develop curriculum, right? Who teaches out of
Mhm.
that curriculum, right? So like if you have the opportunity to talk to any of the other institutions that are chiming in and listening to today's conversation
Mhm.
from the Christian theology, what's some of the key kind of framings do you think that will help encourage them to lean into that tension when it comes to sexuality within the theological concepts? Hmm.
Well, a couple of things. I think, one of the things that I'm grateful to Aaliyah, lots of things, but if, for bringing up just now in particular, is the curricular connection.
Hmm.
I mean, once again, you can't, I mean, it would be very hard for me to figure out how one could teach a course in Hebrew Bible, say even Intro to Hebrew Bible, and not have these issues come up.
Hmm.
And so it's important. And Intro to Hebrew Bible is going to be probably one of the foundation courses in most theological education curricula. Same thing with Intro to New Testament, though it's going to come up in a different way. Certainly the same thing with anything we were talking about in terms of early Christianity. Boy, oh boy, I've got lots I can say about that.
Yes, let's go
And
there. You can go there. This is the
okay,
time to go into that.
okay,
Yes.
okay. So, and I mentioned Hebrew Bible, New Testament, early Christianity in particular because one of the things that I think has been true of Christianity almost from its inception is it's had this kind of obsession with sexuality, um, that it's been unable to shake. I'm not sure that it's actually really tried to shake it, but it's been unable to shake. And it's a complicated story,
Mhm.
but I'll just give you some evidence of it. I think the main person we can hold responsible, quote unquote, for it is our dear friend Augustine of Hippo, um, who is the person who coined the term original sin and is the person who actually crafted what original sin looked like and how he understood it. And basically, it's his reading of the second creation story in Genesis. So the story we think of as the story of Adam and Eve,
Mhm.
um, which he reads as, as really, if I can do a short version of it, here are Adam and Eve living in the Garden of Eden, where they have absolutely everything they could possibly want. All their needs are being met. Everything's great. God's there. It's just perfect. And what could possibly go wrong, right? What did go wrong? Well, what went wrong was again, we typically think, well, it's Eve ate the apple, right? Ate the
Mm-hmm.
fruit. Um,
Mm-hmm.
well, that's not it. It's actually a decision that, on Augustine's read, a decision that Eve made and Adam followed to become like God. So this order in the Garden of Eden was exactly as God wanted it to be. God over humans, humans over nature, man over woman, all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And that meant also the mind over the will and the will over the body. So that's how it was supposed to be. But what Eve and Adam chose to do was to violate that order willfully,
Mm-hmm.
by
Important.
becoming like God. God said, don't eat from the tree, the fruit of this tree.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what could possibly be wrong with that? I'll just have a little nibble. And Eve has a little nibble and gives some to Adam, and boom, they suddenly realize they're naked. And God suddenly realizes that they realize they're naked. And he says, oh my gosh, we've got to get them out of here before they eat from the tree of life and live forever like us. So boom, out they go, right? And they're ashamed of their nakedness, et cetera,
That
right? You
part.
know that story.
Mm-hmm.
So what Augustine understands that to be is basically we've disrupted the order of things. And now not only have we violated, but primarily by violating God's order. And what God does is not an active form of punishment exactly, but basically God turns us over to the disorder that we created, that we brought into being. And the primary way we experience that disorder is through sex. Instead, and on the one hand, I'll give Augustine credit for two things. One, he doesn't think sex itself is bad. He does not think sex itself is bad. And two, contrary to how many of his other peers thought, he also thought women were meant to be women. They're not going to be, being born female is not a defect, which is how they got that from Greek and Roman culture, but which is how they understood it. He said, no, it wasn't a defect. But we experience sex now, what we should have experienced, and had everything not messed up, Adam and Eve would have had sex in the garden.
Mm-hmm.
But only enough times to create the number of saints that God had preordained to populate the heavens, right? And not in the way that we do now. It wouldn't have been, because we just are overcome. Yeah. We can't control who we want it with. We can't control how long we want it, et cetera, et cetera. But instead it would have been Adam saying to Eve, darling, it's time. Okay, let's boom, boom. Thank you, ma'am. I don't know how it would have been.
Right.
Let's do it. Yeah. And 9 months later, here comes the baby. So on the one hand, there's that kind of a little bit of positivity, but a positivity that is really completely gone for the way we live. The other element that's also negative is procreation, by Augustine's understanding, is how sin is passed down. So we all inherit it through procreation. Well, that's as much of a double whammy as you can possibly get. And the tendency has been, again, partly because of Augustine's reading, to blame women more than men for the existence of sex, for desire being out of control, et cetera, et cetera. That's been the tendency all along. And I think you see that certainly in what we see today, right? What we call purity culture, right?
That's it. But it's blamed on the woman's dress. It's blamed on how she walked. It's blamed on, it's all her responsibility and all on the shoulders of the woman. But again, what Aaliyah said, why you never see the men showed up next to get
don't.
any of the blame or shame. Yep.
Right.
This
And
is the root of that.
The kind of double whammy that women of color face, particularly Black women, and I'm thinking of your statistics here too, reminded me of, I don't know if y'all remember or aware of the Moynihan report from, I think it was the 80s, I'm not quite sure, but it was an analysis of poverty and particularly poverty among people of color. And basically, Moynihan blamed that on Black women, that they were the ones that Black families are abnormal, and it's Black women's fault because Black women don't act like women, right? So think about the stereotypes of Black femininity. Jezebel,
Correct.
mammy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sexually promiscuous, or just, basically a servant to kind of take care of the kids.
Yes.
And men, by his reading, black men are demasculinized, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that has its own counterpart, hypersexualized
Yes.
or demasculized. That's what black men face. And so
Yes.
you get this kind of double whammy that black women face. It makes it even more difficult to be honest, caring, helpful,
Mm-hmm.
really addressing the needs of Black people. And makes contraception and access to contraception, all that comes into play.
Mm-hmm. Is there a way to uproot that theologically from your perspective?
Oh my goodness, yes. Well, first of all, exposing it certainly helps.
Mm-hmm.
Simply exposing it. But yeah, there are all kinds of ways. I mean, there are alternative ways of reading scripture. I mean, for one thing, I think one thing that can be helpful is comparing how Christians have read, say, the Genesis story, that to how Jews have read it.
Yes.
We read it as this precipitate fall that is just disaster for humanity. Jews read it as, that's how sin came into the world. But God knew that was happening, and blah 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 blah. So I think a more comparative read would be helpful, and in part because of that, but not only because of that. Judaism has a much easier time with contraception and with abortion than
Mm-hmm.
Christianity does. So that's one thing.
Mm-hmm.
And another thing is, I think to read more deeply into the text and to understand that the text itself is
Mm-hmm.
impacted by its culture, the culture
Yes.
it came up in, which was a deeply patriarchal culture. I mean, we want to talk about biblical family values. Lord have mercy. I don't think we
Yes.
want to, I do not think we want to go back to that.
Right. I think that's what we're looking at, though. Like there's a
Yeah,
resurgence and sort of this
right,
fascination with that
right.
patriarchal. Yes. I'm
Yeah,
jumping ahead. We have that
yeah,
conversation coming up next
yeah.
month, but yes.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, I won't jump in and
But
advance
I
it,
love
but
that.
yeah, yeah. And
And I
then
think, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and then we've already mentioned Song of Solomon, Song of Songs as kind of a really a sex positive thing. It's just much more complicated, and being aware of the complications, I think, would be a very good thing.
This is good. This is good. And I think I want to lean into one. I also, again, feel like I'm doing a promo for our very last conversation in the series. It's with one of the pioneers of womanist theology that really spearheads the comparative thinking. Like, is there an alternative way to read this scripture from a Black woman's voice? And so I'm
Right,
excited for that conversation to conclude this whole
right,
series. But I want to lean into that principle and go back to Leah, because when we talk about the Black church and we talk about the complexities of the stereotypes of Black women that Dr. Moore just sort of really, really laid out for us, I think that is the tension, where the tension lies in, because if you dare give me an alternative reading of scripture that I was raised with. This is the tradition. You're being sacrilegious. You're blaspheming. You are, all of the negative things. And we don't understand that literally it was beautiful how you said it, Dr. Moore. The text impacts the culture, right? Like, and the culture impacts the text. So Aaliyah mentioned this, but me living in Virginia, I want to definitely highlight an example that Aaliyah mentioned, because January last year, there was a video that went viral on social media of a Sunday service. It was at True Vine Apostolic Church of Christ in Hampton, Virginia. And it was of a teen who was announcing that she was pregnant, she was not married, and then apologizes to the congregation, full of tears, mind you. However, so that was one reason it went viral. Like, that was enough. But also then, number two, the pastor then forbid the entire congregation, no members could host or attend any baby shower or celebration of the baby's birth. And that wasn't enough. Then the mother came out and posted, in response to all of the public outrage, a defense of the pastor, saying all of the outrage is disturbing her peace, it's disrespecting her pastor, and it's disrupting her church. And so I want us to speak to that disruption, because the church is the cornerstone of the formation of identity for many. but particularly within the Black community, when we are talking about sexual orientation, sexuality, premarital sex, all of the things. And there is sort of this history of public confession, which can be positive, but within what we're talking about, sort of the public shaming of only the woman, not the man. Um, but those who express outrage over this public confession that we equate to public shaming, there's contemporary implications for that. And so, Aaliyah, from your perspective, sort of want you to talk about this religious rhetoric that's rooted in the Black church. And what are your thoughts from your research that you've done, and particularly the intersection? You touched on it a little bit. I want you to lean into it about sort of the public health implications specifically, but any other implications that you see from a religious and spiritual point of view?
Yeah, absolutely. So what I it's hard. I first
Mm-hmm.
want to name that.
Yes, that's good. Yeah.
Here, it's hard to witness, it's hard to read about, it's hard. And what is often happening is like culturally, you know, because I believe people have good intentions, even though we're accountable for our acts as well, you know,
Mm-hmm.
we and congregants are often well-meaning when they're
Mm-hmm.
doing this, right? Like this is a form of reprimanding. This is a repercussion for one's actions. But I think the harm that's done is love and shame do not coexist.
Mm.
How can you say that you're doing this reprimanding and this punishment in love when it's leading to self-harm and self-hate? And so I think that the messages that we've received around sex, you know, far surpass, you know, what we are able to see in the archives and in the canons, because these things have been happening long before we've even been perceived as human beings and people. But I think that hermeneutically, I think it has a lot to do with people not wanting their child to be quote unquote the Jezebel, and maybe not even having a concept of what that is, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
we're in an age of low literacy rates, and so people may be going to church on Sundays, but they're not reading the text for themselves,
Mm-hmm.
and they don't have the tools and the resources to do exegesis, you know, and really like test the sermons that they're coming in contact with. And so what's happening is like the church is making a decision about what's happening in people's houses. And it's more than just a matter of morals. It's people's like ethical code, but it's also a part of people's identity. And I think when we're talking about identity politics, these are deeper weeds and crosshairs that sometimes take mental health care and counseling, but it also, you know, requires the accountability of ministers and leaders in the church saying, this is what I believe, but this is not inherently what the text is saying. You know, test the text,
Mm-hmm.
see how this applies to your life. And I think once we invite congregants into doing their own exegesis, like invite
Mm-hmm.
congregants into testing the sources and the resources that
Mm-hmm.
ask thing. And I'm speaking in an ideal sense because in some congregations, no shade, no tea, people are recycling sermons. They are not
Yes.
putting a lot of
Yes.
into
And
the.
not even that, you remind me of my pastor had said how he's very conscious of the fact that coming out of seminary, there's pastors, knowing what you learned in seminary, that there's this fear of, like, I can't share that with my congregation because when I may lose members or even lose my job. So even like how the learning and the preparation to test the text that they get in their formation as a faith leader during seminary or their theological training, out in the real world, there's a whole test to even say, I'm going to have the courage to do that within my congregation, within my house of worship. So you're speaking really the contemporary reality that blocks that level of authentic spiritual accompaniment to test the text.
And oftentimes there's this preconceived notion that, maybe the congregants aren't smart enough to
Mm,
understand, right? And like making a decision for them, which is
hmm
deeply harmful, right? Like it's leading to all of these disparities that we could simply avoid or even decrease if
hmm
we were to step out of our pride and make a decision that the education that we inherit and have the privilege of receiving ought to be shared.
hmm
Be
Let's talk
shared.
about
And
these
so
disparities. Yeah.
some churches, well, when I speak of disparities, obviously, people having higher STI and STD rates when they're in churches that are teaching abstinence to marriage sexual education, people experiencing other health complications and being reluctant to go to the doctor because, Jesus writes my prescription, which,
Yes. Yes.
people pray and sing and do all the hymns till the Lord comes, and also go to the doctor
hmm
and get the care that you need, because faith without works is dead. Like that,
hmm
if we're
Yes, I like that.
hermeneutics and principles, then we need to actually like look at what is being said and who it's being said to. So I think that it is in part the responsibility of the leaders of the church, especially those pursuing and seeking to pursue theological education, ensuring that they're sharing resources.
And that helps because it shows a level of spiritual humility that my religious discourse in this house of God, right, does not stand or replace science and health and the facts of public health. And and I think that that is also part of the historic tension, right? Like it's again, it's sacrilegious if you consider that there's any authority over your life and body other than what I tell you that God said through the Bible. People do not take any kind of truth existing outside of the Bible, and there's a danger in that. And so, um, I want to link what you are exploring with what Dr. Amor led us into around sort of the historical arc and the obsession with sex, but from this negative lens. And in when we were prepping for this, you said something, Dr. Amor, about all your readings of the text, right? It spoke to sex, and there is a spirit of forgiveness that we seem to have lost, right? Like it's not the shame and the blame that leads to this exclusion of having real, transparent, authentic conversations. Can you talk to us about how can we really protect and curate and foster more forgiveness in a theological grounding around safe sex education, around, um, I don't even use like the word, but we say premarital sex now, but it was like fornication and that was an abomination. Like it was like these really horrifying kind of, framings for what is sacred, what is the highest expression of love and connection. So talk to us about cultivating the forgiveness lens for this.
That's a really great question. I think there are a couple of things. I think we can go back, in fact, to even to the Adam and Eve story, and to and to how Augustine reads it, to get some of that. For for one thing, I think the way that story proceeds,
Mhm.
God remains in contact with human beings, God
Mm,
doesn't say, okay, you're on your own, I'm out of here. God remains in contact with human beings, right? And if we see what evolves too from that action that Adam and Eve took, yes, they're kicked out of the garden, they will die. Um, you know, um, there will be pain in childbirth. Human beings now have to work, all those kinds of things. And we see this kind of division start to happen almost immediately, right? Cain and Abel, the story of Cain and Abel is a prime example. Um, so knowing, I think one thing we can say is knowing that is not how God really intended the world to be, that what God intended was all of us living in harmony with each other, with the rest of the creatures of the world, all of that. That's what God intended. And that is what God is constantly working toward. If you read the biblical text as a whole, that's where it's headed all the time. And and that's what God is doing and trying to inspire and encourage human beings to do. So how can we then do that? How can we become, connected to God? Another piece of it, I think, that's helpful doesn't focus so much on forgiveness, but it's focused on love. Augustine said, we really were created to be in union with God. And he says, our hearts are restless until they find their rest in thee, So how can we cultivate that connection to God that was really what God intended to begin with, And I don't think we cultivate it at all with an emphasis so much on shame and blame. That's not going to get us there. What we have to do is to, I think, first understand the larger cultural context, right? And the larger biblical context. It's, all of these texts are crafted in a time of empire, really. And I said patriarchal, but patriarchal in a way, it's why I go back to biblical family values, right? The biblical family was not one man and one woman united together in marriage, and having 2.5 children and united together in marriage because they loved each other. That idea of companionate marriage is a very, very recent development. And it's a good development in many ways, right? Because it kind of keeps it keeps the connection. It emphasizes the connection of love and harmony and humanity, right? Now, not that marriage as it's been understood for most of history is itself, even companionate marriage, a good thing, right? Because you have the kind of complementarianism, right? And this idea of what we might call the cult of true womanhood, that the woman's place is in the home, and she's supposed to be pretty, pious, and pure, right? And that particular pedestal is one, again, denied to Black women, but it's what's expected of white women. We can
Very good point.
I think we need to be critical of both of those things as well, right? But again, we can do that within the context of Christianity. There is so much more richness in the Christian tradition than this dominant strand allows for. Think about even, for example, a lot of the female mystics, as we call them, right? Who used language of sexuality and desire and so on to talk about what communion with God was like and what it's meant to be, what would happen if we were to, spend more time with those texts, spend more time with that understanding of who God is and what our relationship to God is supposed to be. And again, it aligns with Augustine. Our hearts are restless until they find their rest in thee, right? So I think there are all kinds of resources actually in the Christian faith that and Christian traditions that could support a much more holistic and healthy way of thinking about sexuality and of recognizing its value and recognizing it as a genuine gift to us.
Yes. Oh, I love that. I love that. Aaliyah, your thoughts on that before, and then you all can give sort of a final closing thought. Yeah.
I second what Dr. Armour had said. I was brought to Matthew 22:34 through 40. I use the NRSV version, but it's the scripture about, the greatest commandment, right? Like the Pharisees are asking, what's the greatest commandment? Like if you had to tell somebody what commandment to follow, what would you choose? And Jesus, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the greatest and first commandment. And the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets. So if we're hanging all the law and the prophets on those two commandments,
That's
conversations
good.
are about sex and sexuality. we need to be asking ourselves, am I loving God? Am I loving myself? And am I loving my neighbor? And this looks like if you decide to be sexually intimate with someone, you don't have to love the person that you're, intimate with, but you ought to love yourself. You ought to recognize that you too are worthy of love and care, and that may look like speaking up before, during, and after a sexually intimate encounter, and being very clear about what you want and what you do not want, right? But I think that like love is about relationship, and we can't say we love people and not be willing to journey alongside them. Yeah.
Thank you for that. That was very powerful. I think we need to pass the collection plate. Okay, so final thoughts, final thoughts that you all may have on this conversation, anything that we didn't discuss that, again, that you feel is important for the listening audience who is really studying this, and hopefully will spark discussions beyond them listening to our conversation today.
I think just one thing I would say, we haven't really talked about this, but it would be good to think about it too, is I think really understanding the depth of the problem of patriarchy and the way that that continues to shape how we bring up boys and men and that kind of thing, so that we can do a better job of when we talk about occasionally these days toxic masculinity, but I think recognizing the damage that we're doing to them as well if we don't bring them up in a way that recognizes basically all of that Aaliyah's been saying, and
Yes.
especially bringing them up in Christianity, to recognize what it is that Jesus wants, what it is that Jesus said is the main commandment, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the only thing I would say.
That is good. I have a note on that. And Aaliyah, your closing thought?
Absolutely. I want to offer our listeners just the opportunity to know that they are loved and that they are cared for, and that if and when they decide to be sexually intimate with themselves or someone else, like let love be the ethic by which you're engaging in activity. I mean, even theological inquiry. I think that if we approach the text in love, then we have some of the harm that's been done by purity culture pedagogy. And so offer yourself and your neighbor love, and be very intentional about the spirit by which you're doing things out of, and the spirit of which you're teaching things out of as well.
Very good. Thank you for that. Before I go to my closing thought, this conversation has been so full because it literally has laid the foundation for the remaining 3 conversations that we're going to have. So the next conversations, I'll do the plug now so that sort of the continuity is almost divine in a sense. In March, our conversation in March, the next chat in this series will be, it's titled Gender Equity Transforming Abrahamic Patriarchy. And so I use that topic and that theme to talk about from the Muslim and Jewish theologies. And so we have scholarship, male and female. And so when you talked about, Dr. Moore, that the depth of patriarchy, how we need to go into that, we're going to go into that. And I'm looking forward to it. And again, it was particularly important to have men in that conversation. Very interestingly, I guess this, I was trying to say that this was such a reason why the male rabbi needed to be in the conversation. He was adamant about this needs to be a conversation with uterus carrying, people like women. And I was like, yes, but the patriarchy, how powerful it is when men are in this conversation about how to transform the patriarchy that has really dominated culture and social, and how that has impacted health and well-being. And so thank you for that. Thank you, Aaliyah, for again, just giving another eye, and even in your closing thought about what Theologies of Care is about, right? This whole conversation opened up dimensions about compassion, and which is a dynamic of love, and that dynamic of forgiveness that we talked about. And so Theologies of Care, very well delved into today with the both of you. So I thank you both for that. And so my final thought that I wanted to share, really amplifying the complexities that Dr. Moore really was explicit about, right? And how do we, like Elisa, create these safe and responsible spaces of sexual intimacy and desire that, in my view, is divine. It's not a condemnation for the unwed or restricted just for the purpose of procreation, right? That historical arc, but can be experienced solely for pleasure and cherished within the beauty of all that is sacred, all that we hold as holy. And so I wanted to read and share a part of a beautiful poem, and it is actually found in the Bible. It is the Song of Solomon, or the Song of Songs. So this is how I felt appropriate to close this conversation out. My beloved is to me a bag of myrrh that lies between my breasts. My beloved is to me a cluster of henna blossoms in the vineyards of En-Gedi. Ah, you are beautiful, my love. Ah, you are beautiful. Your eyes are doves, and you are beautiful, my beloved, truly lovely. Our couch is green, the beams of our house are cedar, our rafters are pine. Awake, O north wind, and come, O south wind, blow upon my garden that its fragrance may be wafted abroad. Let my beloved come to his garden that he may eat its choicest fruits. His lips are lilies dripping liquid myrrh. His arms are rounded gold, set with jewels. His body is an ivory panel decorated with sapphires. His legs are alabaster columns set upon bases of gold. His appearance is like Lebanon, choice as the cedars. His speech is most sweet, and he is altogether desirable. That is my beloved. This is my beloved, and this is my friend. And we will leave it here for today. Thank you all. Peace and love.